Welcome back to It's All Her, the podcast. I'm your host, Geordie Lucas. I'm the founder and editor of It's All Her. I was an actress in a previous life and I'm a mum to a toddler. I've got a lot going on and I have a passion for helping women live simpler, better lives. For the latest in lifestyle and entertainment news, head to itsallher.com. Welcome back. How are you? I hope you're having a wonderful week. It has been a huge week for me. We had my daughter's third birthday, Father's Day, and I also, if you've been following along, received a diagnosis for regarding my mental health. I have been posting a lot about my journey, for lack of a better word, and I finally got some answers last week. So I'm taking some time to process that before I share, just because I want to wrap my head around what's going on before I let you all in. I do want to share it with you all because I think the more we talk about it, the more we destigmatize things. And but I need to wrap my head around what's going on first. And I think that's really important that we all do that before we share things with the world, especially online. Moving on, we are starting a new segment this week. I'm so excited about this one. We're all about making life simpler and better for women at It's All Her. And I thought each week I could kick off the episode with a gal-to-gal recommendation of a product or a service that I'm loving that just makes life better. I haven't quite come up with a name that I absolutely love for this segment. So if you come up with something, feel free to send me a message. Now, my very first recommendation is going to be an app called Urban Company. I talk to so many women, so many busy women in this job, and everyone says to outsource where you can. And one thing I outsource with is house cleaning. I know not everyone is in the position to do this, but I find this is a really affordable way to get your house cleaned. So basically, it's just an app, Urban Company, and you key in your address, you can customize the service, so the cleaning service you need. So you can do home cleaning, you can get your carpet done, an end of lease clean, and it's just really easy. I love that you can customize what you're getting done, so you can specifically pay for 2 bathrooms, or even if you don't want your whole house cleaned, you could just get your bedroom and your bathroom cleaned. And I find it's really affordable. So that is my very first recommendation, Urban Company, if you want to outsource your home cleaning, because we all know there's nothing better than coming home to a nice clean house, and I find that I'm more productive when my space is clean. So let us know if you have a recommendation for a product or service that you love. It'd be so good if we could get together like a database of products and services that make life simpler and better. Don't you think that would be good? I think so. Let's get going to this week's interview. This week's guest is Alex Fevola. Alex has lived much of her life in the spotlight. The ups and downs of her personal life and her relationship have played out in the public and have been reported on by the media. Can you imagine some of your most personal struggles and hardships being published in the newspaper and gossip magazines? Before meeting Alex, I knew that she was Brendan Fevola's wife and that she runs her own beauty business. What I didn't know is that it's now in its 10th year of running and it's just going from strength to strength. The book is an eye-opener that you really do not know who someone is based on what is reported in the media. The amount of hurdles she's had to jump over to get to where she is, and these are hurdles that weren't even reported on. I sat down with Alex to talk about the book, how she pieced her marriage back together, and how she rebuilt from the ground up more than a few times. Here's my chat with Alex Fevola. Alex, thank you so much for joining us on the show this week. I finished your book last week and I was pretty shocked at a lot of what I read, and so much of it, a lot of people won't know these things about you. What was the inspiration behind writing this book?
Well, I think the motivation for me to share my story was always about what happened to me in my early life. I think really it was about sharing what I went through and how I got through it. And ultimately, it was about giving people that may be going through similar challenges some hope. Because when I experienced the suicide and the loss and being a young mum and all those things I went through early in my life, all I really wanted was for someone that had been through a similar thing to say, it's going to be okay. You know,
Yeah.
you're going to get through this, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. Because when you're in that, it seems very hopeless, and it's very hard to picture any kind of a future with happiness. And so I had always wanted to share that journey that I'd been through from a really young age, because back when I went through it, there was no social media, so I felt very isolated. So that was the motivation. And then, of course, if I'm going to do an autobiography, I felt like I really had to be truthful with everything that I'd been through in my life, and I wanted to be really transparent. I think it's, you can't write an autobiography and only share the good things. So, I wanted people to connect with my story, and if they were going through any of the things that I've been through, be able to see some sort of hope and inspiration and comfort, I guess, because it can feel very lonely when you're going through something like that. And it's just to really connect with people and give them some sort of hope.
And you have been through a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of listeners will sort of have a picture perhaps of your life, and, reading this book, I was shocked at, I think in the first few chapters, you attended Mia's biological father's funeral on a hospital bed.
Mm-hmm.
Can you take us back to that time? You were 22 years old when you had Mia, and she was just 4.5 weeks old when her father died by suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And you became quite unwell.
Yeah. So, I had a health emergency on the same day, would you believe? It's still shocks me now when I think back that it actually happened like that. So Mia had been born 4.5 weeks prior. I had a phone call in the morning to say that Lonnie had been found, and that he had taken his own life. And I went into a state of shock, obviously. And then as that day went on, I was feeling generally unwell anyhow, but I just had put that down to having just had a baby, recovering. I was still recovering from the birth. And then, of course, to add to that kind of emotional shock and trauma, I didn't think anything of the fact that I was feeling quite unwell. I actually didn't even register really that I was feeling unwell, because I was in such a numb emotional state. Anyway, that afternoon, I remember standing up and I actually hemorrhaged, and I got taken to hospital, and then it just went from one thing to the next. And it seemed as though everything that was happening to me was going wrong. Everyone that examined me, or, I went in for the surgery and they ended up perforating my uterus, perforating my bowel. And so that's how I ended up in that situation, which was a whole other trauma, I guess, that was unfolding at the same time as this terrible loss, and of course, as well as being a brand new mum. So it was a lot, and a lot emotionally, I think, to deal with at any age, but particularly when you're a first-time mum. That in itself can be traumatizing. Like, it's such a lot to adjust to. But I think because it all happened at once, in a way, it was what saved me, because I had so much to focus on at any one point that I couldn't wallow too much, if you know what I mean. I had to function being a mum. I had to try and get over what I was going through physically, and heal from that. And that really did shock me into realizing how important it was that, that I was still here and I was well, because the biggest fear was my daughter being left without any parents. So it's why I called the book Silver Linings, because although there was a lot of awful things, I really do see some of them as being the reason I got through. Like, one thing saved me from the other, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So
You said in the book as well that you didn't know how you were going to explain this to Mia. How did you, in age-appropriate ways, I guess, explain to her where her dad was?
So first of all, she always knew that Brendan wasn't her biological father. That was something that we'd been very clear from the beginning. I never wanted that to be a shock or feel like she's lived a lie or anything like that. So she always knew that she had a biological dad called Lonnie that had passed away. She knew that from she can't even remember knowing that. It was just information she's always known. And it was never kept a secret, and we spoke about it. So that was very open. It was really just in the way that he had passed is what I kept from her, and I didn't tell her the complete details because I didn't want her childhood to be ruined. I didn't want that vision or her to think about it or picture it or worry or...
And there's an innocence that would be taken away from her.
Correct. And that was how I had felt. That the innocence that was stripped from me at that age, it changes you forever. And I just didn't want her childhood to be marred with that. And I thought, she doesn't need to know the details. And thankfully, she never really asked, which I find so strange because...
Yeah.
As a teenager, I thought she might have started to ask more questions, but she didn't. And it wasn't really until she was in her late teens that conversations would come up and I would sort of, let little bits of information out at a time is really what I did. So I had told her that her father had died because he had fallen from a tree. It was an accident. That's what she'd known growing up. And then when she was old enough and emotionally ready to be able to take on that information, I had told her the extended truth. He did fall from a tree in a way, but it was a deliberate sort of an action. But we still don't really know whether his intentions were to actually go through with it. I still feel it could have been maybe a cry for help because of the manner of how it was done, and that details I won't go into.
Yeah.
But so I feel like we don't know really if it was something that went terribly wrong. And that's where I just feel, it wasn't my place to say that to Mia categorically when she was a child anyway, because it could well have been accidental in some way. So
how do you come to terms with not really knowing?
Look, you go through so many stages of grief. I think being a victim of suicide, and I mean the one that's left behind, we talk about suicide a lot, about the victims of suicide who pass, but we don't talk a lot about the people that are left behind. And it is the most traumatizing, painful, horrible experience to go through. And it always baffles me that it's not really spoken about because this is something that is inflicted upon you, and it shreds you of every bit of innocence. It takes away your happiness, your hope, your future, your everything. And it's very, very, very hard to deal with. So I think really you go through different stages, sorrow, sadness, guilt, regret, and the whys. But ultimately it's a feeling of despair because you can't get any answers.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, what is the most frustrating part of it is you're never going to know why he did it. Did he really want to go through with it? They're feelings that you'll answers, that you'll never get. So it's hard. Really, the only thing that gets you through it is time. Eventually, you learn to live with it and you accept it and you move on. But dealing with it at the time, I think everybody would probably deal with it differently. But it's difficult.
Yeah. Something you wrote about which gave me goosebumps was that you were sitting with Lonnie and there was a football game on and Brendan was playing.
I know, right?
And it was just such goosebumps that the man that you were watching would eventually raise his daughter.
I know. And do you know, I did not know that. That never came to me until I was writing the book. I knew that we'd been at that barbecue because that barbecue had stuck in my mind for other reasons, because of how I was feeling at the time. But I never put two and two together. And it wasn't until I was writing the book and then I realised it was the Millennium Game, and that Brendan had always told me he kicked 12 that game. And so that game, that Millennium Game, was a big memory in his life. And then I suddenly put the two and two together and I was like, I was actually watching that game. And I wasn't watching the football because I was in my own little world. But that's what we were there for. It was the New Year's Eve party and they were watching the footy. And I remember one of my girlfriends that was there was a big Carlton supporter and Lonnie was a big Collingwood supporter. So I remember the conflict of those two bantering and whatever. But I never, ever put together that he was actually in that game until I was writing the book. Yeah, it was so weird.
That was just goosebumps when I read that. How did Brendan step into that father figure role for Mia? Because I have seen on socials he calls her his daughter, she
Yeah,
calls
well,
him
he's raised
dad.
her. Yeah.
And you say as well, you know, your father is not just a biological father, it's who raises you and
Yeah.
who provides and loves you.
Yeah.
But those early days, were there ever times where it was testing?
Well, not really. I think Brendan um, adores children. He was born to be a dad. He couldn't wait to have kids. It was something that he was very ready for, which, I mean, in some ways he was very emotionally mature, you know, responsibility ways, you know, he
Yeah.
wasn't probably ready. But as far as his role as a dad and you know, he never felt overwhelmed or, oh, I wish I hadn't got myself into this. That was
Yeah.
never ever um, anything I saw from him or felt from him. He genuinely adored Mia from the minute he met her. And yeah, I always say to Mia, she's so lucky because although she's lost her biological father, you know, she's got a dad that chose to be her dad.
Yeah.
He wanted to be her dad. He wanted to take that role on. So yeah, he's always been amazing. I've never felt, that like he's regretted it or no. And he, you know, he sees me exactly the same as he sees the rest of our kids,
Yeah.
and she sees him the same as the other girls too because she can't remember life without him because she was only 3 when we met. So, you know, he is her dad, and
Yeah.
yeah,
And you say as well, you know, the maturity thing, and you go into great detail about the ups and downs that you've both had. Having your life play out in such a public way, talk me through the challenges, you know, because women will have experienced a lot of what you have as well, but not in a public sphere.
I think being in the public eye or having a lot of those dramas written about, it just adds to the shame, the embarrassment, the humiliation. It just adds. I mean, I think every person that goes through any of what I've been through, whether it be the gambling or infidelity or um, any of those issues you can have in a marriage, I think there's always a sense of embarrassment or humiliation. And I think it just really, it just exacerbates that because you're dealing with everybody's opinions. I think it's hard when you've got your family opinions and your friends and everyone has their 2 cents worth, but it makes it even harder when you've got journalists writing their opinion and their narrative that they're trying to create a narrative to sell papers that's not always truthful or 100% accurate. So that can, I think, really the answer to that would be it's frustrating.
Yeah.
Is probably the best way to describe it. Frustrating that people are having a say on your life and when they don't really know anything about it. And frustrating back then because there was no redress. There was no way of defending yourself. Now I think you can go on your own social media and at least tell your followers.
You've got your platform.
Yes. Yeah. And there's a lot more platforms in general, like podcasts and, you know, there's so many different news sources now, whereas back then you really only had the main newspapers, magazines and radio shows. That was it.
Yeah.
So you're kind of at their mercy. Yeah.
Do you think there's been a shift in the way that media covers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And a positive one?
I think they're a lot more mindful than they used to be of people's mental and emotional states. I think they're more mindful and careful about how they portray people. I think it's still definitely they create a narrative. There's no doubt about that. But I don't think it's as ruthless as what it used to be. I felt that when we were in that position, there was absolutely no thought. Like for Brendan particularly, with the whole football side of things, they just all piled on whenever they could and would exploit anything they could, anything about him and his personal life because for whatever reason it sold papers. And yeah, I think that's definitely the emotional state of, say, a football player is now taken into consideration and it never used to be. So yes, I think it's changed.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the recent, I don't know if you read about it, but the Bailey Smith saga where he was filmed with a white substance and he's come out and said, you know, I'm dealing with a lot mentally. And there's one side of the camp that are saying, let's back right off, you know, let's just leave him be. He's got mental health issues. Whereas the other side, and I kind of err on this side, is, well, let's cast our minds back to Nadia Bartel last year.
Interesting,
She was
isn't it?
not afforded
No, she
that
wasn't.
same grace.
Yeah,
Is that an issue of gender or
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think there is always a difference in how women are portrayed by the media, always. And you can see it in politicians. You see it in across every sector.
Yeah.
There is a huge difference in the way things are reported and dealt with between male and female. And yeah, I think Nadia was very unfairly exploited and made fun of, and that was how I felt. When I was going through a lot of the stuff in the media, I felt like it was a joke and we were being made fun of, and I really, really dealt with that badly. I felt so victimized by it. I'm like,
Yeah.
why do people think it's funny? Like, I'm going through trauma here. I'm devastated, whatever it may be.
And
my
there was
family.
children involved as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, yeah, it's always amazed me how people could make fun of certain situations. But I think with Bailey Smith, yeah, they've afforded him that respect, and they're aware that he's obviously a young man that's dealing with a lot. He's got a lot, it's a lot of fame and pressure that sometimes these young guys aren't cut out to deal with, and they can go down the wrong path. And they have seemed to really respect that.
Yeah.
And I know that's happened before with, other players that have had issues like that. It's not reported on. And I think yet Brendan was just absolutely smashed for going out and getting drunk, or, his behaviour at the Brownlow, which was pretty obvious because it was everywhere.
Yeah.
But there was no thought of, even by the network that filmed it, maybe we better not. This guy's obviously going through something. Should we not show this? It was like, no, let's show it. And let's everybody show it again and again and again. So, and that was ultimately what ended his career. So I definitely think there's more consideration now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When this was all playing out, I actually, a video of Brendan came up on my Instagram page, and he was talking about it, and he said, I wish I'd had the support and perhaps not as many yes people and people blowing smoke up his ass. And because, at the end of the day, all the football club cares about is how he's going to perform on
and
game
back then
day.
it was a lot worse. Let me tell you, back then it really was all that mattered. Now they have more of a social conscience, I think, and they know that they have to make sure that the player's okay. But back then it really wasn't like that, and it was really, he was measured as a human in his mind on his football ability.
Yeah.
And so that is how I think he got himself into the trouble he did, because he felt like he could redeem himself as long as he went out and kicked a few goals on the weekend, and he always would. So and they would all give him a pat on the back, and really I was probably his only voice of reason at that time. And when you're the partner, it's, it's hard to, if you're the only person telling him these things, he's not going to listen to me.
Because you sort of took over his management role, and you still act as his
I do.
manager now.
Yep.
How does that go? I mean, lots of husbands and wives work together, but how is it managing the finances, his media commitments, all of that on his behalf?
Look, I'm lucky because I have Enrica, who works with me at my business. She handles a lot of the everyday stuff. And so, I have a hand in it still and oversee it, but she does a lot of the liaising. But we're okay. Like, for a couple that spends a lot of time together, because Brendan obviously does breakfast radio, and I'm working from home a lot with my role. We're home all day, all night, all weekend. Like, we're together a lot. We actually get along really well now. So it's only taken 20 years.
There have been ups and downs, and
There's
you cover a lot of that
Yep.
in your book. What advice would you have for women who are on the fence about piecing their family back together? Perhaps they've been separated for a short time or a long time, and they're looking to get that family unit back together. What would your advice be?
Oh, look, I think it's very hard to comment on someone else's situation. I think for me, I certainly have no regrets, because we went on to have Toby, and she has brought so much happiness to the entire family. And we probably feel closer now as a family than we ever have.
Yeah.
But that's not always the right decision for everybody, and I think circumstances are different. But I think if your gut's telling you and you both feel that that's the right move, I think you can definitely make it work after a break. That's one thing I will say, that if you've had issues and you've gone your own ways, sometimes that's definitely enough to be able to reset and come back together with a mutual respect and a genuine fresh start. I think the one thing I would say, you have to be prepared to let go of all the baggage.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's not going to work.
Yeah.
If you're harboring resentment, you're going to still continue to have issues. So that's probably my only advice. Is to make sure you're ready emotionally to start fresh.
And how did you do that? Because I know myself that if everything you'd been through, my husband and I went through, and I went back, every argument I would be saying, I would be circling back and saying, I've forgiven you for all. How did you truly lose that? Because it would be hard.
Yeah, it was. And there was a lot of that for a long time, because we separated and got back together numerous times. And until I went through the actual divorce and we properly separated, I wasn't able to let go of it. And I was full of resentment and anger, and I would bring things up all the time. And that's when I knew we just had to get away, because it was an unhappy household. I was feeling a lot of anger, and he was on eggshells, and it was just... It's very hard. I think you have to deal with it. You have to confront it. You have to go through it, and then you have to put it away if you're going to get back together. So I guess the way I did was by actually leaving him, divorcing him, and finding myself. And once I found myself, and I felt like a different person when we came back together, and I know he did too. He also needed to be independent, because he'd kind of lent on me his whole life, because we met when we were young. And so I think it was that being our own people and being independent and living independently of one another for the first time was really what gave us the ability to come back together as two new people, is how it felt.
And perhaps as equals as well, because
yes, definitely,
you don't want to be your partner's mother either.
Exactly. And that is how I'd felt a lot of the time, and still do sometimes. But we definitely have come back together with a whole new respect for one another, because we also realised what we really missed about each other and how important our family was. I think what Brendan and I have in common is the love of our kids and the fact that we genuinely want to be around them. And so, that's the glue that binds us. And the reason we got back together.
He's a very likable character for all of the, faults and everything that you discuss in the book. I wanted to be annoyed with him, but then I would think about, the guy that's on the radio every morning that is a funny, and you can tell the way he speaks about you and your girls. There is such a beautiful character there for all of the shit that's gone on.
I think the thing is, there was never any malice. I think the things that he did and the mistakes he made was genuinely just immaturity, not knowing how to handle things, and making stupid decisions. And probably being, a young guy with a lot to deal with that he probably wasn't ready for. And there was no preparation for that. He was a young kid from Narre Warren that had led a pretty quiet life, and then he was suddenly thrust into this position of having everything he could ever have wanted. And, sometimes that's a bit too enticing for some people. So, I think that's the thing, is nothing was ever done with the intent to hurt or maliciously. So he is a really good guy, and he's got a lot of amazing qualities, and that's ultimately why I think we were able to move past it. And he did mature. I didn't think it was ever going to happen. He did mature, and he did learn a lot in that period we weren't together. So
So obviously not going into too much detail, but coming back together, were there some really tough conversations that had to be had in order to move forward, or was it kind of like, let's just draw a line in the sand? And
I think we'd had a lot of those conversations and arguments. All that was done prior to. By the time we got to the point of the divorce, we'd sort of come to the end of the road. There was a lot of that had already gone on, and then we went our separate ways, and we had that time out. And by the time we came back together, I really felt free of that baggage. I
Yeah.
didn't feel that anymore, and I felt, yeah, as I say, I felt like a different person, and I saw him differently as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was more of a line in the sand, and let's just move forward from here.
Did you always in the back of your mind think that you would get back together?
No, in fact, when I first left, and I was in a mindset of we will never, the Taylor Swift song. That was me. But yeah, after the first year of separation, I just started to feel differently, and I did really miss him, and I didn't think I was going to feel that way, but I did, and he was obviously really missing the kids as well, and our family unit. It was the whole thing we missed. It wasn't just each other; it was our family.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You're raising 3 girls.
Mhm.
Three girls? 4 girls?
Four
I've lost
girls.
count.
Four,
Four
but
girls.
one's an adult now.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, okay. So he's well and truly outnumbered.
Yeah.
Talk to me about raising girls. What is important to you to instill in them as young women?
So number one, I think, is independence and not looking to someone else to make you happy or secure. I think making sure that they're secure in themselves and happy and yeah, and have a good strong sense of themselves. I think that's really important, and to be strong and fierce and not apologetic for anything. I grew up feeling very apologetic for everything as a female, in the era that I grew up in, and wanting to be polite and not wanting to ruffle feathers and not wanting to upset anybody, and most of all wanting to be liked. And only really in the last couple of years, I've just really realised how that affects you as a businesswoman, as a human in general. That, going back to that gender thing, they're not raised that way, and they're raised to lead and fiercely and be respected for that. But when it's a woman, it's definitely viewed differently. And when I first started my business, I felt that really impacted me in my leadership and my management, because I was trying to be everybody's friend, and I didn't want anybody to dislike me or call me a bitch.
Yep.
Now I feel I've really settled into my role a lot better, and I lead now, and I'm still not a bitch, but I can lead with, making clear decisions, what is right for the business, without that constant thing hanging over me of, are they not going to like me if I say that? Yeah.
There is such a stark difference, isn't it? For men going for their dreams and being fierce in their pursuit of what they want to do and success. They're sexy and
it's admired.
Whereas women, they're a bitch, they're savage, they're difficult.
Yeah.
There is such a difference.
Yeah, and I never, well, I guess I never thought about it because I was conditioned in the same way. Because I felt that way, and I can remember feeling that way about female bosses. And I look at it now and I think I don't think we or any of us really realise the conditioning that we're exposed to and how it forms our thought process. And it's, I've had to do a lot of unlearning with a lot of areas in my life, but that's probably been the biggest learning curve for me has been being in my business and learning to manage and lead properly without any fear of, what people think of me, I guess.
And I think the other area that women are judged unfairly, where men are not, is who they choose to date. And this awful term of wag. One of the listener questions that we had come through was advice for a mum whose daughter is being bullied online. Yeah. And you unfortunately have been through this with Mia, being trolled or bullied for, who she chooses to date. Which is something that you've had experience in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I went through it myself at a very young age. And then, and again, it was the stigma of who I was dating is why people were trolling me. It was nothing I had done, or it was just simply who I was with. Yeah. And Mia has experienced the same thing. And I think, again, it's such a double standard. I mean, these young footballers can date model after model or influencer after influencer. And there's nothing, in fact, they're celebrated, makes them more attractive and more appealing. Women, on the other hand, don't have the same freedoms. And And when I looked at a lot of the trolling that Mia was receiving, a lot of it was from men, young men, old men, the hate and the viciousness. And I'm
It's very
thinking,
disturbing, isn't it?
it is. And I'm like, it says so much more about them than it does Mia, obviously. But I think my advice to that mum is really just to make sure that, obviously, and I'm sure she's doing this, but talking to her daughter and really making sure that she knows exactly where she's at, because it can be so damaging. It's so damaging and soul destroying and strips you of your confidence. But Mia actually taught me, I think, and sort of brought me up to speed with when I'd say to her, well, maybe maybe just don't post for a while. And she's like,
Yeah, right.
why should I stop posting and stop promoting my business or working with brands or doing whatever I'm doing because they're trolling me?
Yeah.
What, shouldn't they be not trolling? Shouldn't they get off Instagram? Like, and I thought about it. I'm like, oh my God,
right.
here's me, conditioned to
But
society
you're in mum
again.
protective mode as well, wanting to protect her from...
Because I'm wanting to protect her from just the comments altogether. I'm like, just maybe have a break of it. But she was so right in what she's saying. Why should she be punished? And why should she be stopped because someone's uncomfortable with her in a bikini shot? Or, if she... And I thought, she's so right. As much as I had wished she would perhaps not be on social media for a while because I was worried about what she was reading and seeing, she was absolutely right. It's them with the issue. It's them that should be stopped, and it's not. She should not be squashed and quiet and and made small because of they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I thought, she really did give me a new perspective. And again, that was my old mindset of, women should, it's a dignified silence, is what I was told. When I went through a lot of the stuff I went through with Brendan, I was told that it's much more dignified to stay quiet, not have an opinion or speak up about your life that they're all commenting on. And I went through that and I did. I stayed quiet, and then magazine articles would be written and I would get slammed because they had written about me because they would assume I'd done a story. And that was, I think, one of the most frustrating things. And now I wish I had spoken out more, but I would have been condemned at the time, big time, for speaking out.
Yeah.
People's opinions on who she dates, I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's utterly
I'm sorry,
ridiculous.
but who cares?
Yeah,
Like...
it's no one's business. Exactly. And it's their obsession with it. It's the media. It's the trolls. Like, get over it. Worry about your own life.
And where it's coming from middle-aged men caring about who a young girl is, that is really quiet.
And it's often a lot of footy obsessive people that they feel some sort of jealousy or ownership over these players or young men that they have. I don't know. What's your obsession? Like, why are you worrying about these kids and who they're dating? So, I think it really is about shifting the perspective of this isn't my problem, that's your problem. And it really is. And I think there has been some real headway made with Erin Nolan. She's definitely made some headway in that space with, it not being so easily accepted or tolerated with those laws that she had passed.
Oh, the anonymity that comes with being online. And I think TikTok's really concerning as well.
TikTok's
Instagram is
terrible.
Yeah, but TikTok, you can really remain anonymous. And the comments on some videos on there is
ruthless. Yeah.
I worry, we have a 3-year-old as well, and I worry what the landscape is going to be when they're on social media. I don't know about you, but that concerns me.
Yeah, look, I can't even imagine. I think either it will go the other way and it will be governed a lot more and because they're going to have to do something to prevent, this kind of thing. But it is frightening and it's unavoidable. You think, oh, I'm not going to let my child go on it, but it's absolutely unavoidable because it's so much a part of our life now, and it's how we all communicate and it's how we market business. It's how we do everything. So, it is the inevitable that they're going to have to, at some point, be on it. And, it's frightening. With my other girls, I worry. I've got a 12-year-old who she's on TikTok all the time, loves it.
Yeah.
And so are all her friends. It's just,
and then you don't want to be the mum that deprives your kid of that.
I know.
You want them to be
It's really
doing
hard.
what everyone else is doing. Yeah.
It's a really hard space and I think that we're all still learning. So, yeah.
So another listener question that we had come through was the difference between pregnancy and that postpartum period. You had Mia when you were 22 and Toby when I think you gave
41.
birth 41.
Yeah.
So what was the difference in experience?
Oh, do you know, it was so different emotionally. I think being a young mum versus being an older mum, you're definitely a different person
Yeah.
and you approach everything differently. I think physically, surprisingly, I actually was okay, and I was very lucky with all my pregnancies that I felt fine throughout my pregnancies, um, and I recovered very well with all of them, including Toby. It was definitely a little bit slower as far as getting that strength back and feeling back to myself. But overall, I felt great, and I was so frightened. And I remember when I went to see my obstetrician, and they refer to it as a geriatric pregnancy. And I was like,
they need to come up with a better
that is
name.
so offensive. And he's like, oh, no, anyone over 35, that's what we call them. I'm like, yeah, it's not a good name.
Yeah, no.
But I remember thinking, gosh, I'm so old to be having a baby. And I was so worried about all the things that could go wrong with the baby or me. But surprisingly and thankfully, you know, it was a really amazing experience. Pregnancy was amazing. And Toby has just been an absolute delight. We were so lucky that she was a good baby, and, you know, she's just been an absolute like ray of sunshine for all of us. Going back to being a mum at 22, it's probably hard to really compare because of what I went through.
Yeah.
It was such a difficult time, but I will say that that having a baby was the single thing that got me through it. If I wasn't a mum and I had to face everything that I had faced at that point, I may not have come out of it as quickly or as well as what I did. But she was a wonderful kid. Mia was a really great baby as well. And although I was dealing with a lot at the time, it was still a really joyous experience. And she brought so much happiness. And I think that was what saved me. It's really
amazing the strength that you find for your kids.
Absolutely. There's nothing like it. I think until you have children, you really can't relate to that feeling, that bond, and that feeling of wanting to protect this little being. And that was something that I didn't realize was in me until I had a baby. And I'm just so thankful because, that instinct to protect her is really what got me through that terrible time.
Yeah. Let's talk about business now. Runway Room.
Yep.
You have had to rebuild many times in your life, and Runway Room, you started 10 years ago, and it's just gone from strength to strength. But you started it in one of those rebuild phases.
Yep.
So how did you, when you had seemingly nothing left, you had 3 little girls, how in the hell did you start a business on top of all of that and build it to what it is today?
Well, I guess part of it was necessity, because at the time Brendan wasn't working. He had gone through that terrible stage and he lost everything, and we were trying to rebuild and recover from him going bankrupt. So a lot of it was necessity, and and I think that when necessity and passion come together, that's when you've got the perfect scenario for success, because you've got the hunger and passion for what you're doing, and you genuinely love what you're doing, which I do, and I still love it today. And you've also got the necessity of this has to work. Like failing just wasn't an option, because I'd put all my eggs in that basket, and I thought, if this doesn't work, we're in big trouble. So I think it was that real will to succeed. And also I think I wanted to do something on my own, and I wanted to do something for me that was mine, that wasn't attached to Brendan. And that had always been my space. The hair and makeup and photography, that was my thing. It was what I was doing before I met Brendan. And I'd always had the dream to create this, complete makeover bar, one-stop shop place for women that hadn't been created up to that point. And so, I was super, super passionate. I can't even tell you. I still live and breathe this business. And so although it was a lot of hard work, it was also something I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
So I was grateful to be doing it.
And you're 10 years down the track now. You're primarily in the product space
Yep.
now. You've just launched this sort of rebrand, relaunch
Yep.
of these products.
Mhm.
If someone had gone up to 22-year-old Alex and shown you a picture that this was going to be your life, what would you have said?
Yeah, it's funny because I don't even think I'd believe it because some of the stuff that's happened to me, I wouldn't even believe if you wrote it in a novel. You'd be like, that's ridiculous that would happen. I would be scared and I would be quite daunted by a lot of it.
Yeah.
So that takes me back to why I wrote the story.
Yeah.
For other women that are going through anything similar, and I've had so many women reach out to me that have been, through someone taking their own life and having to be left to raise the children on their own, and all the other things that you face, because it's not just emotional, it's financial, it's the physical side of it. It's such a lot to take on whilst you're grieving.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of women reach out about that and connect with me, and I think, if you told me that I was going to go through that, I probably wouldn't have thought I would get through it. And so, that is why I wrote the story, to show people you can, you will, you've just got to keep going, you've got to keep moving and try to find that light, really.
Yeah. So at It's All Her, we're all about making life simpler and better for women. How do you do that for yourself? I know it's a big question.
I think it's about not being too hard on yourself and juggling. I think people always say there's the work-life balance. People say there's a work-life balance, and I think there's not really a balance as such. As I have found, it's more about prioritizing what needs to be prioritized that day. So sometimes if Toby's not well, then work has to, go by the wayside, and I'll have to be focusing on being a mum that day. And sometimes really important stuff's happening with work. Like recently I've just come back from Sydney, and I had to leave my mum duties and go to Sydney. And it was the first time I'd actually left Toby for that period of time ever. I haven't even really left her overnight because of COVID and everything. We haven't left her. So that was really hard for me and really daunting. But it was something I had to do for my work. And once I was there, I was fine. And that became priority, and I was in work mode. So I think really just, taking it as it comes and not trying not to be too structured and rigid. I think when we have a lot of structure and you're, regimental with baby must nap at 11, but,
drives me insane.
That kind of stuff I think is what can cause real anxiety and stress. So my advice would be take it as it comes. And if baby's still awake and playing and falls asleep at 1, that's fine. It's those sort of things that make your life a bit easier, rolling with the punches and not putting too higher expectations on yourself and doing what makes you happy.
Yeah. Alex, thank you so much for joining us this week. I will have all of the links to the book, to Runway Room in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
What a story, right? Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing, and thank you for listening to this week's episode of It's All Her. If you have loved this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen, and I'll be back in your ears very soon.